so this is CNET 125. We're here, and we're at the second class meeting. So you see the videos from the previous class meeting are up on this page, the class page. And now we're just going to finish chapter 1. That's my plan for today. And I mentioned, for everybody knows, you can come to any of my classes at 7:30 from Monday through Thursday to ask for help in any other class. So be aware of that. If you are in one of the other classes, usually it's an issue for students who are in the technical classes trying to get virtual machines running and such. And I already have one question outstanding, how to get an ARM Debian. I'll give that a shot to do that at 7:30 unless there's something else happening that I should do first. All right, so let's take a look at the second batch of slides. And we have quite a lot of concepts. This is where you begin to see what I warned you. In this class, there is a ton of information, far too much information to understand in any depth, and all you're supposed to do is get the highlights. You're supposed to know all the terms and general facts about them. Each one of these is complicated enough to practically be a whole class in itself. Security control frameworks. What these things are, there's a whole bunch of them. These are some attempts to organize how you're going to use technology at your company. And as you know, technology affects everything. And so they try to make some kind of map where you can list all the ways technology is used in your business and how you can make sure that you're correctly managing all those things. So all these techniques are ways to do it. The 27000 series is from ISO, an international organization. It is huge. You have to pay a bunch of money for the documents. You get a whole bunch of these giant books. It is a huge list of all these standards for maintaining an information security management system, some way to organize the management over all your stuff. And here's just some of the documents: an overview, requirements, practice for information security controls, monitoring, measurement, analysis, and evaluation, risk management, how to gather evidence, how to do incident investigation, how to perform e-discovery, which is gathering data to respond to a lawsuit, and so on. And there's just many, many, many things here. It's a gigantic document full of all these ways to organize your management at all these levels. Now, there's another technique called the Zachman framework, which was designed to handle IT, not particularly security, but it's based on the 6 questions: what, where, when, why, how, and who, and then executive, business management, architect, engineer, technician, and enterprise, different levels in the company, different questions, and it's just a way to organize your questions. Then there's something called the Open Group Architecture Framework. All these things do essentially the same thing, and they're all in use by different sectors of companies. So this is another way. It has 4 domains: technology, applications, data, and business. Department of Defense has one for themselves. They organize products under 8 views: all viewpoints, capability, data and information, operation, project, services, standards. And hopefully you can see how they're all pretty much the same. They just try to sort all the IT actions in your company. Oh, and by the way, I wonder if I can fix this issue where my face is too big. And here we go. The streaming should have more. Okay, that's better. And now I want to put my video above it. There. That might be a little bit better for the videos and for the streaming viewers. All right. Anyway, all right. And so the British has their version of it that's very much the same: strategic or operational viewpoint, service-oriented, acquisition and technical, and so on. And then there's something called the Sherwood Applied Business Security Architecture that again has these levels: contextual, conceptual, logical, physical, and computing. And then over here, your assets, your motivation, your process, your people, location, and so on. Just some way to organize all the different contributions of technology to your business so you can then answer questions like, are we appropriately modernizing each of these, and are we appropriately protecting each of these from their security threats, and so on. Then COBIT is one that comes from ISACA. ISACA is a professional organization for security people. Particularly, it issues the CISSP certificate and other ones, so it's important. And they have a local chapter in San Francisco, and I've had students that work at that chapter. And they have their 5 key principles: meeting stakeholder needs, covering the enterprise, applying a single integrated framework with a holistic approach, and separating governance from management. And certainly This all sounds like meaningless buzzword bingo to me, but that's because I'm pretty weak on management. The hard part for me for the CISSP was understanding these management terms, because I've never really been in corporate management. But it does have some real meaning, although honestly, when I first passed the CISSP exam, I pretty much just had to memorize some management terms without really understanding the difference between them. So each of those 5 principles has enablers like process and culture, ethics and behavior, and services and people, skills, and competency. So again, you can see they're just trying to sort all the different aspects of technology in your business into some kind of categories to organize your thinking. And it does seem kind of nuts that there are so many standards, but there are a lot, like a dozen here in use. Here's the National Institute of Standards has a special publication 800 series. This is U.S. government system available for people to use, and therefore will be commonly used by the federal government and by people who supply things to the federal government. You'll meet the NIST standards because that's what the government will want when they buy things. So you have these SP 800 documents. There's a ton of them, and they cover a lot of security issues. So here you got it, basic security plus principles, then role-based training for people, guidelines for developing security plans, cryptographic standards, and cybersecurity education, NICE. This is a huge one. Almost all security training programs at every college and every company is based on the NICE standards. I've done a lot of contracting doing this, and everybody bases their stuff on the NICE standards, which is this huge matrix of all the topics you should cover in security courses. And then the Internet of Things here, they just have many, many of these little documents. And so now that they've defined standards for what security should be, they can audit the government, see if they do. And this has been happening for the last several years. They've audited the Department of Defense, so now they can prove that they do not come remotely near meeting their security standards. They're like 95% out of compliance. Because now they've decided what security should be, but they have not figured out how to implement it. They have not funded actually implementing it. So it's kind of a goal, but not actually achieved by the Department of Defense, not even remotely, which is sort of disturbing, but that's where we are. And so these crazy standards, it happens in a lot of areas like graphic standards and other things. And here's the XKCD comic about it, where you find there are 14 competing standards, then somebody will try to write one universal standard, and now you have 15. Now there's still people keep using the old 14, and now there's the new one. This is what happens. And there are just many, many aspects of technology where it is madness. There are so many competing ways of doing the same thing, and it really would be better to knock it off. And within the last year, Europe has passed a law that all future devices have to have USB-C charging, so there won't be so many different chargers out there. And Apple has agreed to make a USB-C charging in the next iPhone for that reason. So that is one way to do it. The government can move in and say, stop having 14 different ways of doing this one thing and just standardize on one. Other regulatory use harmony. Yeah.
I thought the U.S. also passed the same thing.
No, the U.S. did not pass the USB-C law, as far as I know. It was only Europe, but that means all American companies have to do it if they want to sell to Europe.
No, Apple also agreed to do the same thing for this country.
Yes, Apple's going to do it everywhere, but they're only forced to do it in Europe. Yes, and that's the point. If a big
I thought the Congress talked about forcing Apple.
Well, maybe the Congress is talking about it, but they didn't do it, I think. I think the Congress can't agree to do anything. They're too divided. All right, and then there's a privately held company called HITRUST, CSF, that makes a common security framework for healthcare leaders. So that's another framework of organizing things. And so that looks like this, 14 control categories, things like risk management, human resources, compliance, physical environmental security, and more down here. So there's also privacy practices and business continuity, about which we'll talk more. And then there's something called the CIS critical security controls, saying that the first 5 controls will eliminate most vulnerabilities, inventory your hardware assets and software assets. Continuous vulnerability management means that you constantly scan your network to see if anybody has introduced a vulnerability, like plugging in a device without hardening it first. Control administrative privileges, which means you audit what the administrators are doing, and have secure configuration for hardware and software on your devices, which is definitely the recommended standard. You don't just buy a device and plug it in the network. You go through a hardening step first, where you remove the obvious vulnerabilities like default usernames and such. And so that's an organization has those 5 controls, and there are 20 controls. The first 5 are most of them, and there's a lot more here. Really basic stuff like malware defenses, audit logs, secure configurations for your switches, and more down here like incident response and management and penetration tests. So it is a pretty good list of all the things you should be doing at your company, which is why there's such a market for all of us to get cybersecurity credentials and get jobs, because this is just a ridiculous amount of things you need to do to secure your company. And yet you really have to do all this stuff or you'll get hacked. And of course, even if you do them, you still might get hacked, but you'll increase the skill of attackers that is required for attackers to get through. All right, and then there's COSO with the Treadway Commission's framework, which again is another bunch of ways to organize your security program. And COBIT is the IT governance framework derived from COSO, and COBIT is quite famous. And then there's Octave, which is Carnegie Mellon, and I assume they named it Octave because they've broken the thing up into 8 pieces. And so that's what you have here: established drivers, risk management. Then you have your profile, your assets, your desktop, and information containers, and then identify threats, and then identify and mitigate risks. And you break that up into 8 steps, so they call it the Octave framework. Then there's ITIL, which is process management again, and it does have some security component, but it mainly considers service level agreements, how one part of your company will make an agreement to provide service to another, and they have a whole bunch of publications you can get from there. So then there's 6 Sigma, which has been around for a long time, where you go around a circle, and I think it's more, so you define, I think, your goals, you measure to see how well you've achieved your goals, you analyze the situation, you design some more, verify, and then go around a circle here of continuous improvement of your product, whatever you're trying to make, including your security program. And you do rate security programs by maturity. So here's an important general feature to get here. You can have different areas of your company, and you might want to specify its maturity: your product and service development, your service establishment management, your product, service, and acquisition. But the point is, this is going to apply to all security levels too, including ISO 27000 and the Orange Book from the federal government. Initial maturity just means you're function at all. Managed means you're actually organized, and defined means you've measured the output and made sure it meets your specifications. And then quantitatively managed is a more detailed version of managing, and the highest level, the goal, is optimizing, which means that you have a continuous loop where you state your security goals, you implement controls to achieve them, you implement auditing and measures to see how well you achieve them, and then you improve your security policies from the top again to more closely reach your goals and continuously adjust. This is what everybody wants because the landscape is changing constantly, and so you cannot just continue to do what you used to do without changing it, or you will be falling behind. All right, then there's something called CRAM is out there from the UK, another risk management tool where you value assets, identify threats, and then identify and prioritize countermeasures. And here's another XKCD relevant to the field. I've mentioned this one before, I think. So airplane safety is now very good. They have a lot of controls for airplanes. Airplanes rarely fall out of the sky and kill people anymore because there's a lot of layers of defenses. And the same thing's true of elevators. Elevators do not fall with people in them anymore. There's controls. But somehow, if you consider computerized voting, it's horrible. And most computer things are horrible. The computer industry very, very much lacks effective controls to stop bad things from happening. And it's kind of hard to explain to a non-technical person why this is, but computer systems crash, you can't trust them, and computerized voting is considered to be impossible by most experts in the United States anyway. They use it in Estonia, but the United States has repeatedly decided that there is no possible way to secure a voting system enough that you could use computerized voting in America without it getting hacked. The problem is that there are no efficient ways to distribute receipts or records of who voted without violating voter privacy, and that the motivation of attackers is very large. There really will be important nation states like the Russian military trying to mess with our election, and it's very difficult to understand how you could possibly make it secure enough to withstand an attack from such a powerful organization. So most experts say we should just use paper to vote on in America. That is by far the best thing to do, because then you can just manually count the paper ballots, and you're not trusting computer records. All right, anyway, so this is something I mentioned last week, and it comes up again here. It's a big theme in CISSP. You'll definitely see questions about it on the exam. Upper management defines security policy. It is a mistake to try to implement policy from the bottom up. If lower level staff tries to implement any security program, it will fail because a security program costs money and time, and you have to dedicate resources to it. So you must get buy-in from top executive level. There must be someone up there that believes in your program and will push it and enforce it, or it won't do any good. So let's take a look at a Kahoot. I go back to here. Dig through the spam. All right. 1D, there we go. I see the SQL injection. I've seen people try script injection too in the past. Kahoot does not seem to be vulnerable to either of those, not in easy cases. All right, looks like that's enough. All right, which framework comes from iOS, or the International Organization for Standardization, which is ISO, it's not iOS. This, for some reason, even though it looks like iOS, it's really ISO, I think because it's in some other language originally. Anyway, that's the International Organization, iOS. 27,000. By the way, it takes typically more than a year and more than $1 million to achieve ISO 27,000 certification. It's French, someone tells me. Good, yeah. And so it's really, really burdensome to achieve, but once you do, then you can sell to big companies that require it. All right, which framework comes from ISACA? Yep, that's COBIT. All right. Which framework is from the U.S. federal government? Perhaps the most important for American learners. That's NIST, which is, I think, the most common I hear about people, American companies, using. All right. National Institute of Standards. and which framework is primarily for the healthcare industry. High Trust CSF. All right. Billy, I can't see the last name, it'll pop later. Okay. Oh, no, okay, Billy, and then Melissa. And Johan, good. Those all look like real names. Good. All right. So, the security program has a life cycle, which is something I was talking about before. In general terms, you organize how you're going to protect your company with things like risk assessment, and then you implement it, inventorying, identifying your assets, and implementing controls and training to limit what's going to happen, limit what bad things can happen to prevent attacks. Then you operate and maintain this program with things like audits, and then you monitor and evaluate to see how well it's working so you can go back and improve your plan. And that's how you create this continuously improving system where you constantly are improving it. Otherwise, you will not stay successful for long. All right, and then there's compliance. Compliance, this is why you need a profession of auditors. Compliance is just a document of all the standards you must do. And there are a whole bunch of compliance standards, so your company can choose not to be compliant to anything, and then you cannot make any clear statement about your security. But most, when you try to deal with other businesses, they will say, we want you to be compliant with this standard in order to sell us your product. And certain industries are regulated, and the government forces you to comply with them. So, for example, PCI-DSS is not the government, it's an organization of credit card makers like Visa and MasterCard and others. They have formed a consortium, and they have set up security rules, and you cannot receive credit card payments without meeting PCI-DSS compliance standards. However, as anybody could tell you, they don't appear to work very well because there have been so many credit card breaches. And in fact, if you have a small number of credit card transactions, like I think less than 50,000 a year, you don't actually have to prove anything about your compliance. You just have to check a document saying, promising, I do have a firewall, I do separate the wireless network for customers from that for payment, I don't save credit card numbers for later, and so on. You just have to promise doing a bunch of things. But if you take a lot of credit card transactions, you have to pay for an audit from a particular class of auditors every year to come in and inspect your stuff to make sure that you're obeying this. And there's health insurance portability and accountability from the US government, limiting how you protect and handle healthcare data if you handle healthcare data of people in America. And then there's government risk management and compliance frameworks. There's software you can buy for this. This is an important part of any organization. So you have strategic planning at the governance level. Then you have compliance, which is making sure that you're obeying the rules that are written down. And then you have risk assessment, determining what can go wrong. And you have various ways for activities of your company to flow from one area to another. And this is the governance, risk compliance, risk management and compliance, GRC system. Then there, of course, are legal and contractual issues of compliance. The laws vary, state laws and federal laws and national laws all over the place, so you have to have your lawyers tell you what particular laws apply to you. There are privacy requirements, which again vary from company to company and country to country. America is generally quite weak on privacy laws. Europe is very strong. So it's a big issue when you expand to Europe. And California is stronger than other states and so on. So this determines what you have to do about personally identifiable information, which would mean not just a meaningless username, but something like a person's username and birthday, something like that. And someone talks about, Target and Equifax breaches. Yeah, many credit card breaches. Anyway, the new European standard, several years old now, is GDPR, which greatly improved privacy all over the place. They required people to be much more careful with personally identifiable information in Europe, and therefore all the multinational companies had to improve their performance. Facebook is the notorious offender here. Facebook has betrayed their own users many, many times. Originally, Facebook was just for college students at one college, and they promised they would never share the information to other colleges. Then they just shared it to other colleges anyway. Then they shared it outside colleges anyway. Then they promised people that you could set your profile to private. Then they just made it so they shared it with everybody over and over and over again. They have betrayed all the promises for privacy they gave their users, and their users always come back, and they mostly escape regulatory punishment. At least a couple of years ago, 2019, they were expecting actually to get a serious FTC privacy fine. I don't know if they ever did, but I think their general business model has been to just pay the fine and keep breaking the law, which is cheaper for them because they're making so much money from all the targeted advertising by invading your privacy. And when I was a kid in the 70s, this is also how American companies handled pollution. The fines for pollution were low, that you would just continue to pollute illegally and just pay the fine. Europe has begun passing laws that instead of having a fixed fine, like a few $1,000,000, will have it be a percentage of your gross income, like 5% of your annual income. And that's the way to make a fine big enough that it will actually deter companies from doing things. And America may move in that direction. As we were talking about before, what's that?
5 billion is fine.
They end up paying a $5 billion? Yeah. But even that, I think, is a drop in the bucket for Facebook. Yeah. So then there's legal and regulatory issues here. So computer crime is a big issue. There's different kinds of computer crime. You can have just attacking the computer itself with things like malware or denial of service, or you can use the computer as a tool to steal data from credit card numbers or data from a database or harass people. One of the fundamental problems with computer crime is it's very easy to hide who you are. Typically, hackers come off the internet and you don't even know what nation they come from. You often can never track down who did the bad thing or punish them or lock them up. That trying to figure out who did something is called attribution, and there's increasing interest in doing that. But for most companies, there's no value in attribution. Somebody hacked us, it doesn't matter who they are, locking them up is not going to save us. The only thing that's going to work is to improve our security to stop this category of attack. Hunting them down is of interest to military and police, but not really to an individual company, usually. So the legal systems that apply. Civil law is laws and statutes that are organized by precedent and only dealing with issues of money, and there's common law. Common law is the law that is just based on previous court decisions, and this is the major legal system that applies. Other similar cases have set a precedent, and you determine what's legal based on that. Other countries have religious law, like Islamic countries, and some people have customary laws, which is related to best practices. And then there's criminal law, of course, which is the one you see on all the TV shows like murder. These are crimes that are so serious that the police will enforce it even if there is no victim suing, and usually the punishment is to send people to prison. But most of the time, civil law is what's more important in business, which is an offense which will not lead to someone going to prison, but it will lead to a fine or restitution payment. And it's handled by lawsuits. You have to have a victim who sues, demanding money, and then you have a defendant and you have a court over that. One thing about it is you don't need to prove things very well. All you need is the preponderance of the evidence, which means it has to be more likely than not, like 51% chance, and you'll win. Whereas in criminal law, you have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt because the punishment is more severe. So it's much easier to win a civil case. And so if you do lose a civil case, there are various kinds of financial damage. The obvious one is compensatory. If you stole money, you have to give them back that amount of money. But then there's a statutory fine, which is punishment just for breaking the rules, even though that your breaking of the rules did not directly cost anybody money. And a related concept is punitive damages, which is what I was referring to before, just a large amount of money just to make you stop doing it. And those are the types of financial damages you'll have. Then there's administrative law, and this is now a huge issue. The Trump administration and the Republican Party in the last 8 years in America has very, very much opposed administrative law. And this is now coming before the Supreme Court in a month or two. They believe what happens in America is there are laws passed by Congress that will specify a regulation and then you have to obey it. But there are also bodies like the IRS and the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Election Commission, which are a commission to oversee part of society, and then they will pass rules and you don't have to obey those rules. And the Republican Party has generally been pushing this idea that that is illegal, that you cannot have an organization like the IRS that passes a rule like the tax law and then you have to obey it. Any law like that would have to go through Congress. And they're trying to remove the authority of these regulatory agencies to pass regulatory rules, which do not go through an elected official. This is what they call the deep state on the right. So that's their issue. And there was recently a Supreme Court decision ruling that I think the Environmental Protection Agency is not allowed to pass environmental regulations. They'd have to get those approved through Congress. So it is an open issue, but this is the fact. Currently in America, you have all these regulatory agencies like the FCC and so on, FAA, passing regulations that you have to obey if you're working in that industry. And there is a debate about whether we really should have laws passed in this fashion.
But the regulations are based on the law, right?
Well, that is the issue. There was a law that established something like the FAA to oversee aircraft.
They put out their own interpretation of the law.
That's right. They pass out their own interpretation, and currently that's the situation. This is one of the big issues that led to Donald Trump getting in. They call this the deep state. There's all these burdensome organizations passing regulations, and you never voted for these people, and it didn't have to pass by your representatives. The FAA just decides to change how the airplanes are flying, and they feel like abused. They feel like there's too much burden and too much regulation, and you don't have any way to stop it. So anyway, the current situation in America is we do have a lot of these regulations, and you have to obey their regulatory rules or have regulatory fines. But we are, in fact, in the process of having a serious reexamination of this at the Supreme Court level, and this may change in fundamental ways. In some ways, it already has changed with some recent Supreme Court decisions. All right, so then there's liability. If you do foolish, dangerous things, then you violate due care. This is where you have the prudent man rule. You should do what a prudent person would do. This is also best practices. And due diligence is the management of due care. I think we talked about this last time. Due care is not making ridiculous, stupid mistakes, and due diligence is having a manager check to make sure that your staff are not doing stupid, dangerous things. And intellectual property, you own property, trademarks or names or logos. You can have unregistered or registered trademarks, things like Coca-Cola and stuff. You can have a patent for an invention, which gives you the right to be the only person designing that product for a period of time. And you can have a copyright, which you get automatically, by the way. You do not have to register it anywhere. All you have to do is be able to prove that you were the first person to make something, like a drawing, and then it's yours. One trick that people used for decades is you can just if you do something like write a novel or something, you can mail a copy of it to yourself and not open it. And then you can go to court with that envelope with a stamp on it, with a post office stamp, and say, this proves that I owned it by this date. And therefore I was the first person to have it, and therefore it's copyrighted for me. Anyway, now even if you have a copyrighted work, there is some degree of fair sale and fair use. You can use it to some extent. For example, you can use excerpts from it for review. You can make satires based on it and such. And I've used this myself when I've done security audits of Android apps without the permission of the company. My lawyer says I'm covered under fair use. If I have installed an app on my phone and I reverse engineer it to analyze it for security, he says they will say that's a violation of the terms of service, but that is in fact fair use. And my lawyer will make an argument in court that that is fair use. It does not violate their copyright, and I have some defense for it. There is no such thing as being 100% legal. Unfortunately, there's just a judgment call of how much legal risk there is. Open source software licenses too is another issue. Yeah, if you use open source software, are you obeying the license or not? You could argue, I could maybe claim it's educational, but my lawyer said the best defense was to call it fair use. But yeah, anyway, so there's licenses here like end user license agreements and open source agreements that if you buy a product like Microsoft Office, there's a license that limits what you're allowed to do with it. Like you're allowed to use it, but you're not allowed to copy it or sell it and things like that. There's trade secrets out there, which are protected by things like non-disclosure agreements and non-compete agreements. There's a big argument going on right now about non-compete agreements. California does not allow non-compete agreements. The rest of America does. So this pretty much traps people at a company. You're working at like Facebook, and if you don't like it, you want to make a startup doing a similar product, and you can't. But in California, you could. And there's a huge argument now to get rid of non-compete agreements. So intellectual property attacks are things like software piracy, making unauthorized copies of things, copyright infringement, corporate espionage, stealing trade secrets, and there are many ways to do it. One common technique is typo squatting. You buy a bunch of domain names that are very close to an existing domain name. If you put up a whole bunch of domain names which are like Yahoo spelled wrong, then you'll start getting a bunch of emails to Yahoo. Anybody that mistypes that email address in their, will send emails to the wrong domain, and then they'll save it in their contacts list, so there'll be just a steady stream of copies of company email going to these related domains. And customers will mistype the URL and go here, so you can get their secrets and some of their customers and everything by making a fake site that with a slightly misspelled name. That's called typo squatting. It's one of the many ways to do this. Digital rights management comes from the Digital Millennium Copyright Act of 1998. Bill Clinton passed this in order to make it possible to do commercial business on the internet. And so now it is a crime to circumvent copy protection, to make an extra copy of movies or music and so on. And there's import-export restrictions. The United States restricted cryptographic exports in the 90s, which meant you could not sell Windows XP, its original version, to restricted nations. And restrictions have been relaxed somewhat since then, but I found out when I went to DEF CON China, I was not allowed to teach my cryptography course in China. I tried, and they said, no, you can't do it. And I checked the rules, and the U.S. export rules limit, there's categories of people. B is countries that are friendly to America, and we have no particular restriction. D is a short list that are stricter, and E is a very short list of terrorist countries that you can't do anything with. There was recently prosecution of a cryptocurrency expert who went to North Korea and gave them a training course in using cryptocurrency to launder money, and they prosecuted him in America because that violates our restrictions with North Korea. And what I was doing was less serious, but I went to China to teach classes, and I taught classes in exploit development, which was legal, but they told me I could not teach a cryptography class because they're in Group D, China is, and you cannot teach cryptography in China. You violate American export regulations.
Who are the they that tell you not to?
The U.S. government, the federal government.
You get approval for teaching before you go?
Well, I didn't get approval. What happened is the DEF CON organizers knew. So I submitted class, and they approved my class. And then when I showed up, they said, oh, we need another class for the village. And I said, I should teach cryptography. And they said, no, you can't teach cryptography.
Who again?
The Blue Team Village, which is just a village at DEF CON, wanted to add another proc. And I offered to teach cryptography, but the organizers said, no, we can't let you do that here. It would be, China would be okay with it, but when you come back to America, the U.S. government would be mad at you. So the organizers knew these rules because they were military contractors more than I was at the time, and they knew the rules better. I couldn't believe it. I said, my cryptography is not classified or anything. They said, no, you can't even teach the ordinary stuff you're teaching, like AES and RSA, just ordinary cryptography. Even that violates the export rules of America against China, because we particularly have a moderately hostile attitude towards China right now. So data breaches are when confidential information is exposed, and cybercrime, of course, is any crime involving computers. The law enforcement community calls this the going dark issue. As people begin to use encryption, then there is data flowing and the government cannot snoop on it. CALEA is the law that lets the government tap telephone calls, so that you cannot make a telephone call without the government overseeing it if they have probable cause. But there is no CALEA for the internet. They've been trying to pass it for decades. They do not have any right to intercept emails and chat messages and such, and SMS messages. That sort of thing is not covered. And the FBI is constantly complaining about this and talking about the going dark problem. Now, the EFF, the other side of this, they say, in fact, even though there's a lot of communications that's encrypted, there's an ever-increasing amount of devices just lying around with data just sitting on them, like your cameras and everything. So, in fact, there is plenty of evidence for law enforcement to prove crimes, even though there is some data they can't see. And the two sides push back and forth on this. The
Patriot Act allow the law enforcement to get the data without
Yes, this is coming up. The Patriot Act greatly released the legal requirements for the government inspecting your activities, but the technical obstacles are still there. The Patriot Act meant that they don't need as much in the way of search warrants to inspect your data, but if it's encrypted, they still can't get it. That's why they object to this going dark thing. Even if they might have the legal right to examine something, all they're going to get is encrypted garbage. That's why the federal government in the UK and the US and pretty much everywhere is constantly trying to stop people from using strong encryption. So privacy, the EU has the Data Protection Directive, which in the European Union means you must be told how your data is going to be used. So if you give data to a company, they have to tell you what they're going to do with it, and then they cannot exceed that. Whereas in America, they can just resell the data to someone who will resell it again and use it for different purposes without telling you. But you do not allow that in Europe.
Actually, China now is new rule that all the data, user data belong to the user, whether they die or not. When they die, they belong to the family.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. Yeah, you say in China the user data belongs to the user, not to the company. That's an interesting idea.
And when they die, the user die belong to the family.
Oh, so when they die, they have to delete the data from the servers or something?
It belongs to the family.
Belongs to the family, okay.
So the company that store it have to be responsible for safekeeping it, and they have to, move it back.
Oh, okay.
The company don't own the trunk of the data.
Well, that's actually not a bad idea. They have to give back the data when you die. Yeah, that's the problem in America. When people die, their social media accounts are just lost, and nobody can figure out what to do with them.
After a while, the account, is open, right?
Yeah, and this, in fact, is a problem in America. In America, for example, if somebody has like a Facebook account and they die, even if you go to them with a death certificate, they still won't let you at the data, because the fact that you're dead does not mean that your family is authorized to see that. You would have to have like a will proving that they intended to give that to you. They can't really legally give it to anybody without a document that you write before you die promising who's going to get it. Whereas in China, they might be willing to assume your family should get it, but certainly not in America. A lot of people have secrets from their family. Anyway, all right, so there's a huge problem, therefore, for Europe. Europe has a lot of business and very strong privacy laws, but most of the services they want to use are in America. There is nothing in Europe to compete with things like Yahoo and Gmail and all these free services, and all the European companies want to use it. But if they do, they have European data in America where Europeans have no privacy at all. The Fourth Amendment protects American citizens from the government searching and seizing your private data, but it does not protect foreigners, especially since the Patriot Act. So Europeans using American services are in flagrant, outrageous breach of European privacy law. And the business need, though, for them to do that is so large that they keep having a sort of thin legal excuses to do it. The first one was the EU-US Safe Harbor, which gave a sort of exemption so that European data could be processed by American companies. But then, when Snowden leaked out the fact that the NSA was hacking American companies like crazy and stealing all their data wholesale, that humiliated the companies to the extent that they lost this privilege. The European Safe Harbor was removed, and it was replaced by something called Privacy Shield, approved by the EU in 2016, which again is a sort of fictional statement that the American companies promised to protect the privacy of European data so they can be used, although they can't. And this is also related to the current ban on Huawei and Chinese equipment. The American government does not believe that we can trust any Chinese company to prevent the Chinese government from inspecting that data, like TikTok, because of course they can't. If they're a Chinese company and the government comes, they have to hand over the data. And if you're an American company and you have data about Europeans, you have to hand over the data. There's no law you can use to protect yourself. So there's a similar issue. And yet they do have these legal frameworks that permit Europeans to use American services, even though apparently it blatantly violates their laws. All right, so there's an international cooperation for crime too, which is quite effective. I was surprised. One of the High-Tech Investigator Association meetings I went to a couple of years ago, they said they were able to prosecute a criminal in Russia by Russia cooperating to prosecute when they complained for America. But I didn't know that happened. But they say international cooperation on punishing cyber criminals is in fact going up, where you can get police in another nation to arrest people and lock them up. So, laws and regulations include HIPAA, I mentioned before, which applies to protected health information in America. CFAA is the act used to punish most hackers, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, that makes it a crime to access data on a server that you're not authorized to have. So if you hack into a server and get information off it, you're generally violating the CFAA. Now here's Zhu says, the cause why Europeans are using the apps and services is that regular EU company has a small population. Yes, absolutely. That's the issue. The European countries are smaller, and therefore they don't have the financial backing to make a huge company like Google or Yahoo, so it's better for them to use American services. However, it's worse for the privacy of the European customers on those services. So here's the Electronic Communications Privacy Act. This protected communications from wiretapping, but was largely canceled by the Patriot Act after the 9/11 attacks in 2001, so law enforcement can do a lot more electronic monitoring. Gramm-Leach-Bailey Act was forces financial institutions to protect the information, and the Sarbanes-Oxley Act was passed after the Enron financial scandal, forcing companies to disclose their financial information so you can find out what they're doing. PCI-DSS, I mentioned, this is self-regulation by the credit card companies of security controls you must have if you're processing credit card numbers. And then there's breach notification laws. There's no federal law, at least as of the time your book was written. I think there is still no federal law, but 47 states have their own individual breach notification laws. So this is a pretty irritating administrative burden for a company. You would have different, if you get hacked, there would be 47 laws you have to consider with your lawyers to determine what notification you have to do. But that's why, that's why pressure mounts to make a federal law that would supersede all these state laws, so at least it's simpler for people to obey. Of course, if your data was encrypted at the time of compromise, then it's not a breach, and this is why people encrypt laptops with BitLocker. If you encrypt your laptop and then you leave it on a plane, that's not a data breach because the encryption protects it, and that's the reason you want to do it. All right, then there's professional ethics. The IST squared, the people that you'll be getting your CISSP from, have rules. You must obey these ethics or you can have your CISSP certificate revoked. You're supposed to be protecting society and government, acting honorably, providing diligent and competent service to people that hire you, and advancing and protecting the profession. Those are the 4 canons of the Code of Ethics. If you are perceived to break any of these, any person, even if they are not a client of yours and have nothing to do with you, anybody on earth can submit an ethics complaint against you. And this happened to me. Shortly after I got a CISSP, there was an internet feud, and a sort of crazy guy from attrition on the internet who's a real famous troublemaker accused me of just made up lies about me and tried to have my CISSP revoked, so I made it into a class project to write a letter to respond, and eventually they canceled it because he was full of nonsense, and I did not have my CISSP removed. But you do have to respond within 30 days with a letter, or you will lose your CISSP, and the same thing's true of lawyers and doctors. You can lose your license if you have accusations made against you and you do not respond properly. So that's a thing to know. And I felt kind of annoyed that people can protest even when they have no connection to you. It would make more sense if they would have to be one of your clients or something. But anyway, that's the way it is. See, which law said the investment arm can't do financial arm stuff? I don't know about that, GJ. It sounds a little bit like it might be fiduciary responsibility, where you are responsible to represent the best interests of your client like a lawyer. But I'm not quite sure. All right, and so then I think we're up to 1E. Yeah, so this is 1E.
Maybe the Enron.
Enron, yeah. Enron, these investment scandals, of which there's a lot, have to do with companies betraying your trust, like Wells. Right. A firewall between those parts of the company, yeah. Also, Wells Fargo was doing this. Wells Fargo was making. Yeah, well, Wells Fargo was doing a lot of nasty things to harm their customers and sort of trickily extort more money out of them to prop up a branch and such. So, a smaller scandal than Enron, but still pretty significant scandals. Then there's FTX that was taking customer data and investing it in high-risk investments without the customer knowing that, which is a huge crime. Almost certainly Sam Bankman-Fried will go to prison for that. Banks do invest it, but banks have the FDIC protecting them, and they have a whole bunch of regulations about what kind of things they can invest in. For example, banks cannot put that money in crypto. They've been trying to make a crypto exchange traded fund for years. Yes, private entities can, yeah, but banks are restricted and regulated in what they do with that money. This is why. Because in the early days, they would invest it in risky stuff and just lose it. Yeah. Yeah. All right, let's give it a try. All right, so what's the new European privacy law? I guess it's maybe 4 or 5 years old now. Yep, GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation. All right, which laws are enforced by police? Those are criminal laws. You have to do something really bad for the police to get involved. If it's just an argument about money, then the police aren't involved. That's just civil law. All right. Anyway. All right. What law protects movies and music? That's the Digital Millennium and Copyright Act. All right. And then which law ensures financial disclosures? All right, that's Sarbanes-Oxley, which limits what people do in investments. Okay, well, at least they have to tell you what they're doing. There is Austin, okay. All right, and that's, I think, faces from a person I don't think they care about the parts. And you're honey, good. All right, so let's take a break. I'm gonna stop the recording and